Hi, I'm Josh Carter, and this is Flying for Life. MAF has reached the grand old age of 80. From the ashes of World War II, Mission Aviation Fellowship has grown into the world's largest humanitarian airline, serving the most isolated people on Earth in more than 25 countries with over 115 light aircraft. So to celebrate all of this, we are taking a trip down memory lane with one of MAF's trustees, Max Gove, who started out as a pilot in Ethiopia 54 years ago. We're also joined by Lisa Blomberg, MAF's country director in Guinea, the charity's newest programme in West Africa. Through the ages, we'll mark the triumphs and the trials that have made MAF what it is today. Now, we're dedicating this special edition of the podcast, MAF's 80th anniversary, to the last of MAF's co-founders, the late Jack Hemmings, who died peacefully in his sleep on the 24th of January 2025 at the incredible age of 103. The highly decorated former Royal Air Force squadron leader and pilot achieved so much in his lifetime, including fighting for his country during World War II. In 1946, he was awarded the Air Force Cross for acts of bravery whilst flying. In 2017, Jack received the RAF Masters Air Pilot Award and is believed to be the oldest British pilot to take control of a Spitfire at the age of 102. Jack, of course, helped to launch MAF in 1945. He also piloted the first humanitarian survey across Central Africa in 1948. We'll unpack the beginnings of MAF shortly, but first, let's find out about my two guests. Welcome along, both of you. How did you start at MAF? Max, let's hear from you first.
At the age of 7, I knew that God wanted me to be a missionary in Africa. And what I didn't know was what kind of missionary. Was it going to be a builder or a doctor or whatever? But something happened when I was 8, which was quite significant because my parents knew I was interested in mission, and something had happened in Ecuador. And what we found out on the BBC radio on the Sunday night was that 5 missionaries had gone missing in the jungle trying to reach a new tribe, a tribe that had never been reached at all. And over the next few days, we followed the story and finally heard January 1956 that all 5 had been killed by these Waorani Indians. Anyway, when I was 14, we had a missionary come to stay with us for the weekend. He was speaking in the church, and he left behind a book called Jungle Pilot. And when I started reading it, I realized it was all about the pilot Nate Saint that I'd heard about in 1956 on the BBC. He was one of the 5 that had been killed. And God really spoke to me through the book, and I thought, yes, I need to be a missionary pilot. And that's where it all started.
Wow, what a story. That is amazing. And Lisa, how about you?
As a young woman, I also knew about this story of the pilot and the missionaries who were killed in Ecuador. I went to Wheaton College in Illinois, and that is one of the most powerful stories of our alum from that college. And when I went overseas initially, I started in Haiti, where I was dear friends with many MAF pilots. And then I moved on to East Congo, where I also was friends with many MAF pilots. In fact, I ended up marrying an MAF pilot. And to be honest, that is how I came to join MAF. Not only was I a passenger, a partner of MAF in my former role, working in humanitarian relief and development, but I became an MAFer starting in about 12 years ago. And it was at that time when I married into MAF that I began to take up what does it mean to see the most isolated transformed by the love of God through aviation.
I love that, Lisa. You became an MAFer. I like that idea. Let's come back up to date with both of you now with your involvement currently. Now, Max, you're one of the trustees. So what does that actually mean? What do you do?
I'm a board member, and I have to look after the direction the organisation is going. I'm one of 9, and we meet regularly to see that the finances are okay and that the organisation's being run properly.
And of course, that's not the only thing you've done, is it? Tell us some of the other things and roles you've had.
My father was a pastor, so he didn't have the money to lend me to learn to fly. And that was a big question for me. How am I going to learn to fly? And to cut the story short, when I was 18, MAF wrote me a letter and said, we've actually got excess funds at the moment. And it's never happened since, I don't think. But they said, would you be interested, along with other young men, in borrowing money, learn to fly, and then pay the money back? I said, yes, please. So at the age of 18, I headed off to Bedford to learn to fly at the Cranfield Airport. Then I worked as a flying instructor for nearly 5 years to repay the money. But I have to let you into a secret here, because while I was in Bedford, I actually met a young lady who I married, still my wife. And it was her salary, once we got married, that actually paid off the debt. So I can recommend that to other people. If you're interested in flying, find a spouse that's going to help you pay for the flying. Anyway, my wife and I went to Bible college after we'd repaid the debt, and we joined MAF in October 1971 and went overseas with our first daughter in March of 1972 and went to Ethiopia, where I flew as a pilot for 5 years, then 7 years in Kenya, and then all sorts of other jobs in MAF in leadership and management up to the time I retired in 2015.
Wow, there you go. Quite a resume there. Lisa, yours is a little bit shorter, but excitingly, you're the country director of MAF's newest program in Guinea, West Africa. So tell us a little bit about that.
So as the country director here in Guinea, I am all things to all people. So what does that mean? I represent the organization to government officials and authorities. I'm the legal representative here in Guinea, making sure that we are compliant with all things to honor the country we work in and the people that we're serving. Also manage the staff and make sure that, we're all on the same page. It's been about 2 years since I stepped into this role, and it has been a lot of learning because when you're in a new country, there's lots of relationships to build, authorities, partners, people on the ground, our beneficiaries, and how do we really make the most of our resources? How do we have the best shuttle flights to address the needs of our partners? How do we open up potentially new airstrips? And how do we get the proper permissions for that? It's really been a learning curve and an honor to stand on the shoulders of people like Max and others who've been working for decades to bring help, hope, and healing to some of the world's most remote places.
It sounds like you've got a lot of hats, Lisa, and you're
Indeed.
juggling them all and putting them on. And it's so exciting to have both of you here because MAF has turned 80. So today we're taking a little trip down memory lane to mark that big birthday. Now, I mean, there's been hundreds of memorable milestones along the way, but we haven't got time to navigate all of them. So instead, we're going to go for my top 10 with the help of Max and Lisa. So let's start right at the beginning, Max. How was MAF born out of the Second World War?
Around the world, there were young pilots who were flying in all sorts of situations, and they were seeing the planes being used to destroy people and to destroy cities. And many of them also came in contact with missionaries in remote places. And so these young people, and it wasn't just men, it was women as well, and they felt it would be a good thing to set up something that was professional, run properly, and just totally focused on flying people into these sort of areas. The great thing is that while it was happening in the UK, it was also happening in the USA and also in Australia and other countries, South Africa and also New Zealand. So it was a movement of God in a very real way and quite significant. The initial organisations that started in 45 were in the UK and also in the USA, unknown to each other, but they found out about each other after the actual organisation had started. And the American group decided that our name was a bit better than their name, and could they please use the same name? So from then onwards, it was Missionary Aviation Fellowship, later changed to Mission Aviation Fellowship.
That's amazing to hear that, how God was speaking to people in different parts of the world about the same thing, and then everyone comes together. That is so exciting. And Max, tell us a little bit about the actual people who were involved in this right at the beginning. Who were they in the UK and across the pond as well?
The first pilot from the UK end who really got involved was a guy called Murray Kendon. He was a Kiwi who'd been flying on Coastal Command during the war and was just thinking, we need to start something. He got involved with a mission organisation here in the UK who promised to help get the thing going. And Murray was soon joined by Stuart King and Jack Hemmings, and some other people also, Ken Ellis, Tom Banham and Trevor Strong. And all of those men here in the UK got together and decided that it would be a good idea to actually start something and actually do a survey in Africa. That was the first thing that they decided to do.
And Max, tell us a little bit about Betty Green, because she is actually MAF's first pilot and female.
Betty was involved with the US end of things. She'd been a ferry pilot during the war. She would deliver planes to different parts of the world. Very experienced lady. And she actually joined with the guys in America who wanted to start this organization. And Betty ended up as the very first pilot for MAF anywhere in the world in 1946. She flew from California down to Mexico with a plane load of ladies. So to me, that's so exciting. So I've got 4 daughters, and I just think how wonderful that the organisation was actually taken off the ground by women.
Yeah, it's so exciting. Lisa, let's bring you in there, because obviously you're a woman working in the aviation industry today. Is it still very much a man's world, or have things changed? And of course, also, you've got your cultural context of Guinea there as well. So how does that play in for you as a woman in the aviation industry today?
I'm honestly so impressed every time I think about Betty Green, and every time I think about the way in which she was really pushing the barriers and saying, nope, I am going to serve God in the way that he's gifted me and wired me. For me, there is a tremendous amount of respect for women, but I would definitely say it is a man's world. If you look, a majority of colleagues in civil aviation around me are male. Again, I have a lot of respect. I think some of that respect, to be honest, is also because I have a captain who is my husband. He is a pilot in his own right, and a respected one and experienced one. And so I think that does also help me in terms of just the relationships that I have when I talk with other Guinean pilots, and they're able to say, wow, yeah, I saw your pilot flying and he's a great pilot. And so I think that definitely builds that relationship. But I would say the same thing for Betty as it is for me. The relationships that we build and the respect that we earn through those relationships, through our skill. I may not be able to fly a plane, but being able to communicate and explain administratively what's needed and how I can support the team, the aviation organization that we are, it also speaks to people. And so I think, being a woman in this industry is not easy. And yet through time, through demonstrating that we do what we say and we say what we do, again, Betty Green was there to serve. And that's one of the things that I say. We are here in Guinea to serve.
I had the privilege of meeting Betty Green in Africa. She was on a trip through Ethiopia when I was there, and it's just struck me as being such a lovely lady. She was just a super person, and it brought back to me some of the stories that Stuart King used to tell about Betty when she was seconded to MAF in Sudan in 1950. We would often be flying Muslim traders. The interesting thing is they always asked for Betty as their preferred pilot. And when you think of the culture of these Muslim men wanting to fly with a Christian lady, absolutely incredible. Yeah. So that speaks a little bit to the woman. And we've had a number of other women pilots since then, and they play a really major part around the world now in MAF. Still not in the majority, but they're coming along, and I'm all for that.
Yeah, I'm waiting for my female pilot. So anybody listening, you come on out to Guinea. We're waiting for you.
There you go. Anyone listening to that? That's one of our milestones we're talking about on MAF's 80th birthday back in 1946. Yeah, pilot Betty Green flying from California to Mexico. Let's move on to 1948 then, because MAF's co-founder and pilot Jack Hemmings and MAF co-founder and engineer Stuart King, well, they were doing this survey, which you briefly mentioned, Max, but actually things didn't go so well, did they? Because they hit a banana tree whilst flying over the Burundi mountains. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, they'd gone out there for 6 months in this Miles Gemini aircraft, which was an underpowered, twin-engined wooden fabric aircraft. But it was the best they could get hold of at the time. And they were on their way back from Congo to Nairobi, which was their main base. And it was flying over the mountains of Burundi that they noticed a problem. They'd been climbing at 350 feet a minute, which was sort of the maximum that plane could do. They were flying towards a ridge, and they were fairly sure they were going to cross the ridge. But then just before they got there, Jack said, look, we're going down. And First of all, the speed indicator showed that they were not climbing at all. Then it showed they were going down at 350 feet a minute. And Stuart thought we were just going to scrape over this ridge. But as they went over the ridge, one of the wings hit a banana tree. A big chunk of the wing came off. Stuart said, "Oh, that's all right. We can repair that." And next thing is they were sliding down a mountain, coming to rest in a field with everything smashed up around them. They got out with just bruises, and the rest of the survey trip they did by road, which was quite interesting because in one sense they could have thought, well, that's it, we've wrecked the aeroplane, we'll have to go home. But they decided to carry on, and they did a survey by road in Tanzania. But the country that had made the biggest impression on them when they were coming down through Africa to Nairobi was the country of Sudan. There was huge need there. And they went back to the UK thinking, out of all the places we visited, Sudan is the place we should base.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, what a story that is, Lisa. I mean, you think about it, it could have all been over right at the beginning, couldn't it? I mean, both co-founders could have been killed, but instead they still did it anyway. And I just wonder, Lisa, have you experienced anything like that in your work with MAF so far, that you just had to carry on anyway?
Well, thankfully, not so dramatic. Fortunately, no near misses or near-death experiences. But, oftentimes the small discouragements or the no's or kind of the constant battle can be exhausting in and of itself. And so sometimes you can feel like giving up. There have been multiple times where we didn't get this permission, or we didn't have enough partners to fly, or we were sort of feeling, oh, why are we here, God? What do you have for us here? And I can honestly say that what has kept me going and our family here in Guinea is to look back and to be able to say, wow, God, look at the things that you've done in and through us. And you asked us to go to Guinea as a family, and you asked us to serve in this way. And so we're going to keep going and following what God is inviting us to do.
Yeah, amen to that. Definitely. Let's move on to another of those milestones, because in 1950, Max, you've already alluded to this, MAF Sudan launches. Lisa, let's just go back 80 years. Imagine if you were now setting up the program in Guinea 80 years ago. I mean, you're the newest African program running now. I mean, can you imagine doing that in an unknown territory without the advances in technology that you've got now?
Oh, no Google Maps, no V2 tracking? I don't think so. No, I mean, it feels hard to imagine. We rely so much on the technology and the advancements. To be honest, it feels like it would have been such a big leap of faith, just uncharted territory everywhere you go. Really, as much as it sounds crazy, maybe it would have been a gift to have to rely more by faith in what God was inviting you to do. I can't confirm it on Google Maps or on the tracking device we have. So yeah, I can imagine it. I think it would demand more faith.
I think one of the things that I've enjoyed so much in all my years in MAF, and it's been well over 50 years now, has been the way that right from the beginning, we've taken steps of faith. We've seen it with Stuart and Jack and Murray, huge steps of faith, moving on when everything else seemed completely black in front of them and just no way forward. And they've taken that step of faith, and we're still doing that today. And as Lisa said about the questions that we ask sometimes, why are we here? Why haven't we got the permissions? But it's moving forward and knowing that God's with you and being willing to take that little step that makes all the difference.
And Max, in terms of piloting, I mean, back then, what did they have? I don't know, a map and a compass? No GPS? Is that right?
It was a map, a compass, and your watch. And those three things together were absolutely vital, because you could time how far you were flying in a particular heading, and then you could plot that on the map. That's what Stuart and Jack did when they flew out to do their survey. And to be honest, that's what I did in the years I was flying in Africa. We didn't have GPS. We had maps that were not very good. When I was flying in Ethiopia, there were large areas of the map that were white. And in that area, it said relief data believed not to exceed 3,500 feet or whatever, or relief data unreliable. And so what you had to do was to kind of learn your way around. You had to recognize things. So it was your eyeball. It was the map that you had, but you could draw lines on it depending on the heading and the time. So my biggest navigation thing, I would say, really was my watch. There was an occasion when I got myself in a bit of a pickle. Pilots are never lost. They're just temporarily unaware of their position. My first stint in Ethiopia was in the rainy season. The end of the rainy season, I was flying through valleys and calling back heading directions to my wife, who was actually following on the radio. And suddenly I came into an area that was completely clear of clouds, and I couldn't recognize anything. And so I had to call back to my wife and ask her to repeat all of the direction changes and all the headings, all the times. And I then had to plot it on the map and find out where I was. So it was that sort of thing. But GPS has made a huge difference.
Wow, that is incredible. I panic when I'm driving around Kent and I get lost, let alone up in the clouds. Wow, that really is amazing. So a year later brings us to our next milestone, which is Papua New Guinea project launching in 1951, which is now MAF's biggest project. Now, Max, you're the master of launching new MAF programs. You've done it in different places around the world. Tell us where.
Oh, goodness. Madagascar, Mongolia, Bangladesh, Liberia was the last one. One of the things that you do when you go into a new country to do the survey is to try and identify, why would God be bringing us to this country? What is significant about this place? What difference can MAF make? In Liberia, one of the big things we wanted to do was to set up a West Africa base that would then reach out into other countries. And one of the first ones we're going to look at was Guinea, and also Sierra Leone and Ivory Coast. And it's because of that vision for Liberia and beyond that Lisa is now in Guinea.
Let's go back to the Mongolia project that you mentioned, because that actually has particularly far-reaching spiritual impact. I've got some stats here, because I think when you launched there in 2001, just a handful of Christians, but according to data from Harvester Ministries, there's now around 80,000 Christians in Mongolia. That's amazing.
It is amazing. Yes, it is amazing. I first went to Mongolia to do a survey in 1991, just after the Iron Curtain had come down across Europe, and the Russians were pulling out of all these different places, and Mongolia didn't want to be tied in with communism anymore, and so they were opening up to the West, and they asked us to come in to run their aviation health service. We also found out that the church was very small. Someone said you can get all the Christians in Mongolia on the back of a yak. 4 or 5, I think it was. and so when we asked ourselves the question, what can we actually do in Mongolia? The goal was to fly for the church for at least 10 years and see the church grow in the remote areas. And that's exactly what we did. The church had grown a huge amount, and as you were saying, up to 80,000 today.
Yeah.
It's not a highly populated country. There's probably only 2.5 to 3 million people there, but it's still significant.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Max, the two places you forgot that you set up a project in, because you've done it so many times, Uganda and Timor-Leste as well.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. And also, did I mention Namibia? That was another one.
I told you he was the master of new MAF programs. Now, Lisa, you and your husband, Jonathan, who you've already mentioned is an MAF pilot, have moved to Guinea with your 5 children. Just say that again, with your 5 children. Wow. To run MAF's newest program. So what have been the main challenges of running a fledgling program? Having 5 children, I would imagine.
Yeah. The need for patience is probably the biggest challenge. Learning local law and compliance and all of that can be done. We have amazing lawyers. I have a local lawyer, MAF's lawyers. We got a great team to support us in making sure that we're compliant, but then building that team and doing it with patience, I think, are the biggest challenges.
Now, Lisa, I'm fascinated to know how you do all this with 5 kids in tow, because I'm a father of 3, and I have taken them on a short-term mission, and that was stressful enough, I have to say, let alone living in it 24 hours. Yeah. So tell us about having 5 kids on mission permanently.
Well, I have 2 sets of twins, and so everyone's really close together. So we have 5 kids in less than 4 years. So yes, think that through. And it's a bit wonderful and chaotic. And yet everyone's each other's best friend. We as a family try to set really good, healthy boundaries with work. And I'm more successful at that at sometimes than others, as I'm sure you can all relate to, working parents. But at the end of the day, we're all on mission together. And the kids know that they're a part of MAF. They know what the plane is doing. Sometimes they hear stories around the dinner table. Well, who did you fly today? Oh, yeah, this man with a broken leg couldn't walk. Or we flew some medical missionaries out into the interior. Being able to share that and allow our kids to also be a part of that. That's who they are. And it's just following God. 3 of my kids have been able to be on a flight here in Guinea. The other 2, maybe when they're a bit older, maybe in a year or so, we'll get them on a flight.
And how old are they, Lisa?
They're 4.5 and 6.5 and 8.5. So they'll soon be 5, 7, and 9.
Now, we're still in the 50s for our next milestone, and this is actually something that you've both mentioned already, and I think it's because it's one of the things that lots of people connect MAF with, and that is the martyrdom of Nate Saint. You've mentioned the book, Jungle Pilot. So, Max, briefly recap the story for us.
January 1956, 5 missionaries had gone missing in the jungle trying to reach a new tribe. These Wairani Indians. The pilot, Nate Saint, he was one of the 5 that had been killed. They went in to reach this tribe, who were quite a fearsome tribe, had no outside influence for years. Anytime a trader or something tried to find them in the jungle, they would be killed. Some young men decided that it would be good to make contact with these people. And one of the things they wanted to do was a survey from the air. So they got Nate Saint involved, who was also based in Ecuador. And they flew over the jungle trying to identify where these people were, and over a period of time made contact with them from the air. They finally found a sandbar alongside a river, and Nate was able to land there, and over a period of several days flew supplies. Nate Saint had worked out a method of dropping a bucket from an aeroplane and then pulling it back up again. He was able to perfect a way of getting a bucket down. They would send gifts like machetes and things like that, and then the people would send gifts back up again to the aeroplane. They'd actually made contact with 1 or 2 of them who'd come out of the jungle, and there's actually photographs of them sitting with Nate Saint by a model aeroplane on the sandbar. And then Nate flew back to his base with the photographs. 5 days later, they found the bodies in the river.
Yeah. So, Max, those missionaries were speared to death, weren't they? Why did it happen?
Well, these people had had no contact with the outside world for many years, and were actually fearful of any contact from the outside. And they'd met these people who'd come in a small aeroplane, and they were fearful something bad was going to happen to them. So it was a self-defense thing as to why they killed these 5 young men.
Yeah. Tragic, but spurred so much on from that. And of course, the book, and it's inspired you and inspired so many people.
And the other amazing thing too is that Betty Elliott, the wife of one of the martyred missionaries, went back into this tribe and took one of her children with her. And also Rachel Saint, Nate's sister, went in, and a number of the people who were involved in the spearing to death of the 5 became Christians and are now leaders of the church in the jungle there.
Yeah.
Quite amazing. And more than 50% of the people in MAF today are there because of Nate Saint. So what was a real tragedy, 5 young men, all losing their lives, all leaving their families behind them, turned into something amazing. Not only were many people in the Wairani tribe converted and come to know Christ, but many, many people have gone overseas to fill the gaps. And it's not just MAF that's been affected, it's many other missions as well.
So an amazing story. Well, it brings us on to the 1960s now then. 1960, MAF flew evangelist Billy Graham to Tanzania to address 35,000 people, as Billy Graham often did back in those days. MAF has flown many famous people over the years as well. Think about people like Princess Anne, Bob Geldof, Archbishop of Canterbury, Me Too activist and actor Ashley Judd, and BBC's Michael Burke. Now, Max, you personally flew Terry Waite, who, of course, was famously kidnapped in Lebanon in 1987, held hostage there for 4 years. Why did you fly him? What was going on?
Well, he was actually accompanying Archbishop Runcie, who was actually visiting Uganda, and we flew the party from Uganda back to Kenya. So that was my contact with Terry Waite.
Wow. And what was he like?
Tall. A big man. Yes.
Yeah. Lisa, have you flown memorable passengers around Guinea? Or your husband, I should say.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say we've flown any famous people, but, what I love about the people we're flying, in fact, many of them are kind of humble. There's one, his name's Prophet Ray. And I remember he showed up to the airport ready to go on his flight. Come to find out he's going to one of the orphanages he supports. And he literally had 2 sacks over his shoulder, full of clothing for the orphans at his orphanage. And, simple acts of love and care. That's who we want to fly. MAF planes fly the most humblest missionaries and pastors who are just serving with what they can, maybe just the Bible that they have on their lap. And also, famous evangelists and others who maybe are more renowned, but it's all flying for life. It's all part of MAF's vision to serve the remote places that we live in.
Well, let's head towards the mid-60s now for our next milestone, 1964 to be precise, and MAF mounts one of its first major emergency responses, rescuing people fleeing from the Congo crisis. That's a conflict which killed around 100,000 people. It's just hard to even imagine that, isn't it? MAF has been on the front line of many disasters since then, things like floods, droughts, hurricanes, earthquakes, evacuations from terrorism, epidemics, and of course, most recently, the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Max, when you were MAF's country director in Bangladesh, one of the other things you've done for MAF, which we haven't mentioned yet, you oversaw the relief efforts of the Boxing Day Indian Ocean tsunami, which many of us remember back in 2004, amazingly, just over 20 years ago now, and that killed nearly 228,000 people. So how did MAF respond to that, Max? What happened?
Well, one of the great things was that MAF USA already had a program in Indonesia. So they were set up, they were in the country, they were trusted by the government. And so they were able to put planes immediately into the Aceh area. But we had an amphibious plane in Bangladesh, and we were able to loan it to the program with pilots for about 6 weeks plus. And so that flew down from Bangladesh to Aceh and did a lot of work, because one of the problems was that a lot of the runways had been destroyed. So the land planes were landing on the roads, and our plane was able to land on the water and bring a lot of relief to people.
And that's a float plane, isn't it?
Yes, it's got wheels and floats. So the key thing is to put the wheels up when you're landing on the water and make sure that the wheels are down when you're landing on the runway.
Yeah. even I can understand that, as never flown a plane in my life. And another time in the 90s, there was an invasion of locusts in Chad. Now, that sounds very biblical, doesn't it? You actually arranged for spray planes to fight the insects. I mean, this sounds like a film, really. Fighting the insects coming at you in the plane, you turn it into basically a giant spray can. I don't know, how did that work?
Well, we actually bought a couple of spray planes used for spraying in agricultural terms, and we put them into the country with pilots who could fly spray planes, because it's quite a different way of flying a spray plane to doing our kind of flying, bush flying. So we were able to really make a difference. We were already in Chad, so we had the permissions to operate. Just a question of us being able to do the spraying.
And did it work?
It did work, yes, it did work.
Wow, amazing. I mean, MAF involved in so many different things. And Lisa, in the short time that you've been the country director in Guinea, you had to mount a disaster response for a huge road traffic incident which killed 16 people, injured over 50. Tell us about that.
One of the ministers here in Guinea called me and said, "Hey, Lisa, that we have a problem. There's this horrible incident that happened. We're coordinating medevacs to the capital. What can you guys do?" And through not only that relationship, but then also the expertise of our two pilots, one who had been in PNG for 2 decades and knew and understood how we could get as many injured people into the aircraft in a safe way and get them back to the capital. So that day we were actually able to bring back 8 critically injured passengers, thinking open fractures, head wounds, really that needed to be laying prone. And we were able to do that again through that trust that we had with the local government official, as well as through our speed and ability to respond. It was literally a sunrise to sunset operation that day, and a huge gift to be able to participate in that life-saving operation.
Now, speaking of Medivacs, Max, in 2007, this brings us on to our next milestone. You launched MAF in Timor-Leste, which is where actually you are the country's only air ambulance service. There isn't another one. And today, MAF there carries out around 250 Medivacs every year, and you've certainly flown lots of Medivacs over the years. Can you tell us a story I heard about a man bitten by a crocodile in Ethiopia?
And I got a call from the missionary to say that an old man had been brought into the mission station who'd been bitten by a crocodile 2 days before. It was a river that ran through the jungle, because that part of Ethiopia is rainforest, and he'd been at work in his field and was going home, crossed a river, and just as he went to get out the river, this crocodile grabbed him by the back of his leg, and he managed to hold onto a branch and pull himself away from the crocodile, but then couldn't walk. He had to crawl home, and the people had a choice. Do we carry him to hospital? It would be 2 weeks' walk, or do we take him to the missionary, which was just a couple of days? So they carried him to the missionary's house, and he called me, and I was able to divert from the flight I was doing and pick the old man up. And the missionary said to me, we expect he's going to have his leg amputated. I did the flight to the hospital in 20 minutes rather than 2 weeks by land. And if he'd have gone on the surface, he would never have made it. Anyway, about 3 or 4 weeks later, the hospital called me and said, could you collect this man? He's ready to go home. So I landed at the airstrip where the hospital was and looked around the crowd. There was no one there with one leg. They all had two legs. But I saw an old man there with a stick, and he was the one. The people in the hospital, the doctors, had been able to save his leg, and so he was able to go back home to a useful life again.
That's incredible, isn't it? That it would have taken 2 weeks. I mean, he would have lost his legs, maybe lost his life. By that point.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't even imagine. Yeah. But 20 minutes instead. I mean, that really emphasizes the importance of MAF. Well, my final MAF milestone has to be when co-founder Stuart King passed away in 2020 at the age of 98. Now, Max, you first met the MAF legend when you were 14. Can you tell us about that first meeting and that lasting impression that Stuart had on you?
I'd gone up to MAF from the age of 14. Every year I would go up until I actually started my flying training, and they would advise me on different things that I needed to be concentrating on in my studies at school and that sort of thing. And there I was talking to Steve Stevens, who was the man in charge of the UK office at that time, and in came Stuart King, who'd been visiting the country from his base in Africa. And so I had that chance to meet him, and he was just a very gracious, kind man. And over the years, that impression has stuck with me because he's just been that sort of person. A godly man, without question, a guy who was interested in everybody. When he used to come and visit us in Africa, he would always bring sweets for the children, and they remember that. He knew their names, and he would just be nice to everybody, just good to everybody. One of the things that really stood out for me, though, was when Stuart retired around the age of 65, something like that. And the guy who took over from him, I watched how Stuart handed over to this person, Charles Wilson. And Stuart didn't interfere. He didn't come round every day to make sure we were all doing what he'd started. In fact, every time there was a change, Stuart was always welcoming of it. And he was always so supportive. And I think that struck me in a big way, because as a founder leader, it can be the most difficult thing to hand over an organisation to someone else.
Yeah, he was an amazing man. Lisa, looking back at the lives of MAF's founding pioneers when it all started 80 years ago, people like Stuart and Jack, who we've dedicated this programme to, passed away just a couple of months ago, Betty Green, Murray Kendon, Ken Ellis, Tom Banham, Trevor Strong. I mean, what achievements of theirs stand out for you and the impact on your work today for MAF?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes back down to their faith and how they... Yeah, I joke about it. Oh, compasses and maps in their watch. But that demands an unshakable faith. And I'm encouraged by the fact they did a 6-month survey across Central Africa. I mean, I've been to many of these countries in Central Africa, and it's uncharted territory. And I'm honored to be kind of on this side of their faith and to be able to say, hey, what does it look like for me to exercise this type of faith today and in what God is asking of me, of the organization, and how do I exhibit that faith in tangible ways, trusting, as Max's great advice was, trusting that God is at work in us, through us, and ultimately here through MAF.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we've gone through my top 10 moments of MAF over the last 80 years, memorable milestones. But what about either of you? Have you got anything else you want to share, personal memories or to do with your ministry, Max?
When I was in Kenya, I had to fly one of our aircraft that had come from Sudan. I had to fly across to Chad, but they wanted me to go on to Europe to pick up some spares for one of the aircraft. And people were saying, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could take another person with you and get another baggage allowance? So we agreed it would be Sarah because she was on a half fare. So little Sarah, 8 years old, was going to come with me. And we had all sorts of adventures on the way. But just before we got to Congo, which was the first place we were stopping at, the radio stopped working. So we landed at the MAF base there in Nkundi, and the engineer showed me what had happened. A plug had come off the back of the radio up under the panel on the passenger side. It was quite difficult to get at. You had to really crawl under the panel and get the thing back on again. So we took off from there. I flew on to another place and noticed as I was flying that the oil pressure was dropping. As we were flying over this jungle, it just looked like broccoli from the air. And you go down in the jungle, you'd never be seen again. Even if a plane burst into flames, you'd never be seen again. So there I am watching this oil pressure gauge going down and down and down. I figured it in my mind, I'm not going to get to the destination I want to get to tonight. I'm going to have to divert. Made the diversion and found out that the aircraft engine was using a lot of oil. And so fortunately I had oil with me and was able to put that in. And the next day we set off again, flew to this place in Central African Republic. They said, we've got enough fuel for you to go from here to Chad, but we don't have any other fuel. That's all we've got. So put the fuel in the plane, took off again, and the radio stopped working after about 5 minutes, which was quite important because if we'd had a problem, we couldn't have told anyone. So I knew that plug had dropped off the back of the radio. So I said to Sarah, look, squat on the seat, you hang on to the controls, and I'm going to try and get under the panel and get that plug back on again. And I tried 2 or 3 times and I couldn't get it. By that time, Sarah was in tears and she suggested that we pray about it. So we prayed about it. I put my hand back under the panel while she was flying the plane and managed to get the plug back on again. And everything carried on as normal.
Wow.
So that is incredible. That's when she was 8 years old.
She was 8 years old.
Yeah, that's incredible. Lisa, can you imagine any of your kids flying a plane?
Well, see, this is why I would prefer my children to wait till they're a little bit older. Now, see, 8 feels like a good age. 8 feels like a good age. Not a chance.
And that is all we have time for in our special 80th anniversary episode. My big thanks to MAF trustee and former pilot Max Gove and Lisa Blomberg, MAF's country director in Guinea. You've been listening to me, Josh Carter, and Flying for Life, MAF's podcast. Now, if you would like to donate to MAF in Jack Hemmings' memory, MAF's co-founder who passed away in January, then please visit jackhemmings.muchloved.com. Thank you, and until next time, bye for now.